Sally as well. Thank you for coming along. I would like to remind everybody present that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded for publication on the council website. Apologies for absence. I don't believe we've received any.
Only apologies from Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting. I'd like to move the minutes of the Cabinet meeting on the 14th of June 2023 to be approved to be approved as a correct record. Are there any comments on the accuracy, please? Councillor Arnold.
I've got several areas, sorry, Leader. The first one being appointments to outside bodies. I asked for a follow-up of confirmation around point 4.13. Trustees of a trust can be liable personally to third parties because unlike a company, trust has no separate identity. And I asked for confirmation that council does provide members with insurance around that, and that the wording where it says should be provided would actually be strengthened up. I've had no confirmation or evidence that we do have an insurance policy for that. And then I'm a bit concerned that I had quite a long conversation with the Assistant Director of Adult Social Care, and I don't seem to have been minuted at all with those conversations. But the outcome of the conversations was me asking for more detailed rationale around how the scoring, they came to the scores they wanted, and why one was chosen over another, for instance. And it was just more clarification, which it was agreed would be provided. There's nothing to say that I said that in the minutes, and we haven't had any further information.
Thank you, Councillor Arnold. I'm sure Councillor Cockshaw.
Sorry, Leader. Just quickly coming back on Councillor Arnold's point, I understand, I have been told that we have had that feedback produced. I do apologise it hasn't been shared with Cabinet, and soon I'll make sure to rectify it and follow up and hopefully get something as soon as possible. It's setting best value and make sure it is, of course, shared. So I do apologise that it hasn't been produced before this meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Coxon. And on the other item that you mentioned, the monitoring officer is here, so I'm sure she's made note and we'll be able to follow up on that. And as regarding the actual accuracy of the minutes,
Chair, just to clarify, we believe that it is minuted in the exempt minutes.
Thank you, Chief Executive. And with regarding to the other issue, the insurance, I'm sure the monitoring officer will get back to us. Okay, thank you. Can I now move their accurate recording of the minutes of the meeting? Can they be approved? Subject to the amendments. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Item number 3, I've not agreed to any items of urgent business. Item 4, does anyone have any declarations of interest to make? No, thank you. Statement of the leader. I intend to not make many remarks this evening because we've got a heavy agenda and I think we need to press on. Plus there are members of the public that are here and I'm sure they'll be pleased to learn that I propose to bring the item that they're here for, which is the call-in on the Cabinet decision for Thurrock supported bus services, to bring that forward, and that will be the first item that we discuss. So you won't be needed to spend your whole evening here waiting for that. That draws to close my statement. Item 6, briefings on policy, budget and other issues. No? Okay. Item 7, have we received any petitions from members of the public? No, thank you. Item 8, I'm not aware of any questions submitted by non-executive members. Item 9, matters referred to the Cabinet for consideration by Over and Scrutiny Committee. No. Okay, so item 15, we're now moving that up to the next item on the agenda. This is, I should point out that this is actually a report to note. The decision has already been taken by Cabinet, so it was just for us to note the 2 recommendations from ONS. As I said, I'm aware that there are members of the public here that are interested in this, so I have allowed that a member of the public can speak to the Cabinet for 2 minutes. I think you've decided who that's going to be. If they'd like to come forward, yeah. Can we arrange for a microphone, please?
So it's ready to go for you now.
Okay, thank you. Are you ready?
Okay, when you're ready. Yes,
You
thank
can
you.
hear me? Obviously, I wasn't aware that I was going to talk, so I just wrote some notes about my particular circumstances. My son Jack is a 20-year-old young man. He's got special needs. We live in East Tilbury Village, and he goes to USP Palmer's College. The only route of public transport that is accessible to him is the 374 bus. If there is no bus, that means no college for Jack and other pupils at the college, and unfortunately that will mean he'll have no option but to join the unemployed group of people. If Jack has any break in education, this will result in him losing his EHCP, and losing his education will result in him having a bigger disadvantage of gaining any future employment, and it will put him in a position where he may be forced to go onto the benefit system and live on that sort of source of income. When you've got special needs, as a young adult, you're encouraged to learn to have some independence, and getting the bus was Jack's first source of independence. The train is not an option for us. We live a 45-minute walk away from East Tilbury Station, and then from Grays train station it would take him another 36 minutes to walk or pay for another bus. It's not an option. He's got hypermobile joints. Walking that far every day would be too much for him. He's had no travel training. The council have had him on the list for 5 years and never given him it, even though I've chased it yearly. He's not capable of reading timetables. He wouldn't know what to do in the event of a delay, a cancellation, or in an emergency. For people like Jack, it's not a safe option. Return bus fares at the minute cost £4 per day, which is £20 a week, which is affordable for us. If he has to now go and get a train to Grays, a return daily fare is £7.80. If he has to add on a bus to get from Grays to Palmer's, that will add on another £20, taking our weekly spend from £20 a week to £59 a week, which is simply too much for a single parent like me that's on a low income myself. I can't afford £236 a month, so I'm really concerned that this may mean that Jack has to leave college and put himself in a difficult position. I know that there's other options. I could apply for SEN transport, but to the council, that's going to cost a lot of money. Jack's not the only SEN child using that bus, and there will be a lot of people applying for SEN transport. I know that there's an older generation that live in the village where I do. I know they use it for getting shopping, going for hospital appointments. Some don't have access to a car. And I know it affects many families in many different ways, and they're all vulnerable in many different ways. I'm just trying to tell it from a youngster's point of view, and that's the only independence that he gets. So I'm just asking to please consider keeping that bus, because we need it, we really do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for speaking to us. Just one thing that I'd pick up on that. You mentioned that your son's had no travel training. The Director of Adult Social Care is here, and I'm sure he's made a note of that, and somebody will be in touch to it might not solve everything, but if he's entitled to that, he should get that help. Okay. I wasn't proposing to have a debate on this, but would any Cabinet member like to speak? No? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So we've received the report from ONS to note, recommendation 1.1, which is to note the decision made by the Planning, Transport, Regeneration, Overview and Scrutiny Committee to take no further action in relation to all call-ins submitted in relation to the Cabinet Decision 110643, Thurrock supported bus service. The original Cabinet decision will be progressed. Item 1.2, acknowledge and consider the public question submitted to the Planning, Transport, Regen Overview and Scrutiny Committee as outlined in section 3.7 of this report during its debate on this report. Is the recommendation agreed? Thank you. No, okay, so I did say this, the debate had already taken place around this proposal. It's been discussed fully. It should have just been a straightforward note the report and agreed. I did allow somebody to speak on your behalf. I've now allowed a second person to speak. We've heard what you've said. We've taken the decision to agree and to note the report. So unfortunately, that is the end of the matter, I'm afraid. So what's going to happen to our if I'm afraid that this is the matter is now closed. The matter is now closed. So if I could ask you to resume your seat, please, so that Cabinet can carry on. So that Cabinet can carry on with the rest of its business, please. So. So if I could ask you to resume your seat, please. If you could resume your seat, please, or leave the chamber so that we're able to carry on with the business of Cabinet. Okay, so item 11, which will be the Housing Capital Programme modification. Councillor Johnson to introduce his report, please. I'm really sorry, if you persist to interrupt Cabinet business, you will be asked to leave the chamber. So please be quiet or leave the chamber. Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Leader. The report before us is to recommend a contract modification in terms of finance and contract term relating to the refurbishment of non-traditional builds in various locations in Thurrock. Whilst we are looking to increase the contract sum,
Councillor Massey and Councillor Salmon, if you could actually either resume your seat or leave the chamber, please. Councillor Johnson.
Okay, once again, thank you, Leader. The report before us is to recommend a contract modification in terms of finance and contract term relating to the refurbishment of non-traditional builds in various locations in Thurrock. And whilst we are looking to increase the contract sum by just over 1.7 million, it must be pointed out that the original HRA business plan was budgeted for 7.5 million, and this increase is still well within that budget envelope, as it raises the cost to just under 5.273 million. To date, 41 homes have been started, with approximately 30 nearing completion with readiness to hand over. This request to increase the budget and the timeline has arisen due to the incorporation of new retrofit standards, which increases the scope of work due to additional structure requirements, and unfortunately, of course, due to inflationary price changes and the availability of accredited supply chains. Our objective remains to refurbish the maximum number of properties of this type that we can to a very high standard, with progress continuing at 51 dwellings. We are very mindful of the resident experience throughout this process. We are committed to continually support and update residents in a proactive manner. And with that in mind, I would respectfully ask members of the Cabinet to agree the recommendations as set out on page 14 of tonight's agenda. However, I am, of course, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. This report, along with others, were discussed in detail in formal Cabinet, where we asked several questions. But do members have any further questions that they'd like to ask before we go? Councillor Cockshaw.
Thank you, Leader. I'm just wanting to really be really sure with option 2, just saying that when we say anticipated to achieve 53 properties, are we likely to actually get to 53 just to be, or we can definitely achieve the 44, just a bit saying that can we make sure we maximise to that 53 number to make sure we're actually getting as many of these properties refit?
I think the figure's 51, to be perfectly honest, but even so, yes, yes, we will. As I said there, our objective remains to refurbish the maximum number that we possibly can. I think there's about 200 of them in total.
Any other member wishing to speak? Councillor Maney.
Thank you, Chair. As you said, we did have the opportunity to discuss this report, and we have to invest in our housing stock so that we have the best quality accommodation for our tenants. But perhaps not now. I'm just mindful of the fact that the report tells us that many of these properties are defective in the meaning of the Housing Defects Act. I'm still not entirely sure what that means, what the consequences are for the council, and I know we're not looking to refurbish all of the properties that we have in the borough from this allocation. So I suppose I'm not, as I say, not now, but at some point, can we have a sort of clear understanding of how we're going to get to the point where we do refurbish and we'll take other steps so that we're not in contravention of that provision? Because at the moment I'm seeing a report that says those properties are in contravention of the law, but I'm really not sure what we're doing about that, other than the select number of houses that are mentioned in this report. So perhaps, Chair, if we can just, after the meeting, have some sort of clear idea of what we're going to do to address all the properties that don't meet the required legal standard.
Yeah, certainly. Obviously, there is a legal question there, and that needs to be answered. I recall some time ago when I was previously in the housing department, that word of that the dwellings are defective. It covers a multitude of sins. Defective doesn't actually mean they're about to fall down. Defective means there's a defect or there's many defects. So, well, yeah, I'll try and get that better for us, so we can see it more clearly.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further members wish to comment? Okay, so the recommendations are at paragraph 1.1, 1.2 and 1.3 on page 14 of the agenda. 1.1 is to approve the modification to the contract to increase the contract sum by 1,757,471 spot 74 to a total of 5,272,415. Is this agreed? 1.2, approve the modification to increase the contract term of the refurbishment of the non-traditional construction properties to April 2024. Is this agreed? The Cabinet agrees to delegate authority to the Corporate Director of Adults, Housing and Health in conjunction with the portfolio holder and Section 151 officer to sign the variation contract, to sign the contract variation. Do I have agreement? Thank you. Item 12, Lower Thames Crossing Development Consent Order and Planning Performance Agreement. Mark Bradbury to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Leader. Cabinet has received regular updates from the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force on the Council's continued challenge to national highways to ensure that any proposal for a Lower Thames Crossing benefits both the residents and businesses of Thurrock. The proposal for the Lower Thames Crossing has recently moved from a proposal to a development consent order and is therefore now with the Planning Inspectorate for a decision. The process commenced on the 20th of June and will run to the 20th of December, and the Council continues to be represented in that process. The report sets out the background and the process going forward, but in particular seeks your approval to entering into a planning performance agreement. Some of the cost of the Council's presentation and challenge to national highways was previously met by a planning performance agreement with National Highways that covered roughly 50% of the cost of that process. That planning performance agreement lapsed once the development consent order was accepted by PINS, and we've since been negotiating a new agreement to carry on from that period late last year through the process to December this year. I'm pleased to report that we've been able to negotiate an improved planning performance agreement that covers significantly more of the Council's costs in continuing to represent our position than previously. It's considerably more than a number of other local authorities have been able to negotiate as well. And it will cover most of our costs with the exception of King's Counsel advice and King's Counsel and legal attendance at any examination hearings. So moving from roughly 50% to potentially in excess of 80% of the Council's costs. I therefore recommend that in order to continue our position that the proposal to delegate authority to complete the planning performance agreement is approved.
Thank you, Mr. Bradbury. I mean, it really is good to hear that we've got got it in place that nearly 80% of our cost will be recovered. Whilst we still object to this road going ahead in the form that it is, I think it's really important that if it does go ahead, we get the mitigation that the people of Thurrock deserve. So that's good to hear. Is any other member wishing to comment? Councillor Snell.
Thank you, Leader. I mean, it's in the Commissioner commentary just above the recommendations, and it says here that unless properly mitigated, the LTC presents a significant risk to Thurrock in terms of economic, environmental and social impacts. I think we're caught between a rock and a hard place with this one. I think we all know that this is going to be disastrous for our borough, and I personally can't see that any mitigation is going to make much difference to the impact it's going to have, and the impacts are going to be negative across the board as far as I can see. Having said that, we do have to fight as much as we can to get the best outcomes we can, although personally, as I said, I don't think there are any best outcomes, it's just least worst outcomes. So I will agree with the recommendations, but I just think it's a shame that throughout the entire process and every meeting I've been to at least, Highways England or whatever the iteration they're using at the moment is, have, to my mind, been obstructive. They've not been completely honest with us. Every time we get close to getting some sort of a breakthrough with them, they change the leadership team. So I think it's been a shambles from them from day one. But as I say, I will agree with the recommendations, but I don't think there are any good outcomes for us in this.
Thank you, Councillor Snell. And from my time on the Lower Thames Crossing, that was exactly my impression of Highways England. They just weren't interested. It was just a show trial almost to say, look, we're here. So yeah, I agree. Any other member wishing to comment? Councillor Maney.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick comment really to say thank you to officers for fighting our corner on this. It's not right that the cost involved in representing the council and challenging this proposal is met by the taxpayer, so it's only right we recover as much as we can and protect taxpayers from footing the bill for something they don't want. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank Mark and his team for doing a good job in protecting our position.
Thank you. I think that's endorsed by everyone in the Cabinet, I would have thought. Any other member wishing to comment? Okay, so I'll move to the recommendations are at paragraph 1.1, 1.2 on page 24 of the agenda. That Cabinet notes the DCO pre-examination process and draft examination timetable and the ongoing role of the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force. Agreed? Thank you. 1.2, that Cabinet approves entering into a further planning performance agreement with National Highways and delegates authority to the Director of Place to effect this decision. Agreed? Thank you very much. Okay, item 12, fees and charges. Can I call on Councillor Snell to introduce this report, please?
Thank you, Chair. By now, the financial position this council finds itself in is well known, as is the fact that we are reviewing and revising all of our financial plans as a consequence. You'll recall that we set out a fees and charges schedule at full council in February, but we did set a proviso that they will be looked at and revised later in the year. So in order to do that, we have designed a fees and charges policy, which we are proposing to be adopted tonight. I think it's important to say at this point that although fees and charges have always existed, there hasn't been, up until now, a policy dictating how, when and under what circumstances that those fees and charges should be reviewed and any changes to them implemented. So I think this is a big step in the right direction on that score. The Council currently has a list of 1,099 different fees and charges. So as you can imagine, any review process will take some time to complete. And we're talking about maybe as long as 3 years for some of this work to be carried out and completed. Therefore, we have split the review into 3 parts, the details of which are in the papers, so I won't go through them all. But what I will say is that we have done some benchmarking against other local authorities to gauge how we compare and to get a better idea of where we should be with our own charging structures. It should be noted that some of our charges haven't been raised for quite some time, several years, as many as 5 in some cases. And they're out of date. So I know people have commented on the wild variation of percentage increases on some of those fees and charges, and that's for that reason. We've applied inflation across the piece, and we've tried to come to a reasonable balance of how much each should be increased. So, as I say, that does explain the differences, which I know some people have pointed out. So we propose that the rises in this first tranche of reviews take effect from October of this year, and thereafter will rise by the CPI rate of inflation yearly. The fees and charges in stage 2 of the review will be scheduled to take effect in April 2024 and will also rise yearly with the CPI rate of inflation. As I say, the bigger piece is a longer piece of work, and we'll bring that back later at a future Cabinet meeting. I think it's important to point out that where fees and charges are discretionary, not statutory, the aim is full cost recovery for providing that service. Indeed, it's the default setting of the new policy. This is not about generating profit for the council. It's, in fact, quite the opposite. We're trying to ensure the council doesn't lose money on the services that it currently provides, and I'm quite sure that we probably are, and we didn't know it. So this is why it's good to get this baseline in, so we know where we are moving forward. However, I mean, some people have also raised the issue of will there still be discretionary discounts for some services to priority groups, and that is indeed the case, that they will be available. So that most people should, you know, if they're in a priority group, should still get access to the services they currently enjoy. Referring to ONS, I've been to a few of the relevant ONS committees over the past couple of weeks to hear what they've got to say about the new proposals. And I think it's fair to say that they were not universally welcomed, although all committees did eventually pass the recommendations through majority voting. The main reason for objections were based on members not wishing to put any more cost onto the residents already presented with a 9.99% rise in council tax this year, and that the fees were already agreed in February. We have already said that, you know, we did agree at full council that that would be the case, we would review them. So I was disappointed to hear that keep coming up again and again, because we did agree that. I was also disappointed that some members appear to show no concern at all or no regard at all for the council's current financial situation, and I think some of them would rather the problem didn't exist. However, we don't have the luxury of wishing that problem away. Our problems are real and must be dealt with, and it's probably not an exaggeration to say that it's precisely because various administrations down the years avoided passing real-life increases onto residents and instead tried increasingly desperate ways of finding alternative revenue that we find ourselves in the current situation. So I think I'll leave that one there. Anybody's got any questions?
Thank you, Councillor Snell. Any member like to comment? Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chair. Like Councillor Snell, I attended my relevant ONS to see what scrutiny was like for the fees and charges, and I do welcome one councillor who had welcomed that Thurrock charges less, and this has been the case for a long time, that we are not charging as much as our neighbours for the same services provided, but we've also got a lot less charges overall than some of our statistical neighbours. So this does beg the question, if there are some things we are charging for, that we are not charging for, that we should be charging for. And I think that will come in some of the later parts of the review. So I'd like to ask the portfolio holder if that's the case.
Yeah, that is exactly the case, Councillor Carter. The ones that are sort of immediately accessible, we've done already, and we've got another tranche coming through for early next year. But yes, indeed, obviously we've got at least 1,099 sets of fees and charges. It is a big piece of work, but we are going to be looking at exactly that. And that's what the benchmarking is all about: is to find out where we are in relation to everybody else. It's not about you know, Council X is charging £55 for a service, so we're going to do that. It's not about that at all. It's about finding where we lie in the land. But ultimately, are we charging the right money? I mean, we might even find that in some services we're charging too much, in which case we'll adjust that if that's required. But we do need to find out, we do need to charge for a service that we're providing. We can't hemorrhage money like we probably have been in the past through not charging enough through fees and charges. I'll get it right in a minute. So it's an important piece of work, and you know, we've got to get this done. We've got to get it done properly, and we will do.
Any other member wishing to comment? Councillor Johnson.
No question, Councillor, just a comment, and I think I said it at the informal cabinet. This is really important, and I do welcome the new policy. I mean, I'm still flabbergasted to think that we didn't really have one that was fit for purpose in the first place, which I say I still can't get my head around. But I'll reiterate again to Stephen, this is important. I know it will take some time, but please do it as quickly as you can.
Any other member? Councillor Maney.
Thank you, Leader. I think it's all been said, really, but I think sometimes some members approach this almost as if we have to be apologetic about doing this. This isn't really something we should only be doing because of the financial situation that the council is in. We should have been doing it anyway. The BVI, the point made in the BVI was that if other local authorities aren't doing something, then you can take that as an indication it's not best practice. Well, conversely, if they are doing something, it's a sure sign that it probably is best practice. And when you look at that benchmarking data, it shows you a huge flaw in our approach. So it's something we should be doing irrespective of the financial position we find ourselves in. There's no such thing as a free service. If it's subsidised, we're just not charging for it. Somebody else is paying for it. And I think that's something we have to bear in mind. So there will be people who perhaps don't like some of the decisions that come out of this, but I think it's a necessity. And I look forward to seeing seeing this progress, because it's long overdue.
Thank you. Any other member? I mean, I'd just like to say that I agree entirely with every member of the cabinet, particularly what Councillor Maney just said. The road to recovery for this council is restoring its finances, and this is part of that programme, making sure that we're charging for the appropriate rate, and we're charging for services that we should be charging for. So I welcome this paper, and I also welcome the further work that the finance team will be doing to look at what we're charging for, if we're charging for something that we should be charging for. And as members have said, the benchmarking is really important. And if you look at that, we are going down the right road. So without further ado, recommendations 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5 are on page 61. So 1.1, the Cabinet agree the proposed fee and charges policy, Appendix 1, in particular agreeing the commitment to full cost recovery and annual CPI inflation increases as the default. Do I have agreement? 1.2, the Cabinet agree the proposed fees and charges increases for the material areas, Appendix 2. Do I have agreement? 1.3, that Cabinet considered the feedback and additional information from all overview and scrutiny committees meetings and additional meetings held in relation to fees and charges, Appendix 4. Do I have agreement? 1.4, the Cabinet agree the proposed new charges in Section 8 of this report. Do I have agreement? 1.5, that Cabinet note the requirement for a further detailed review and analysis of remaining fees and charges by Q4 2023-2024. Do I have agreement? Thank you. So, item 14, tender of the Council's Insurance Associated Services. Councillor Snell, could you introduce the report, please?
Councillor who? Mind the...
Sorry.
That's quite all right. This shouldn't take too long anyway. Our current insurance and associated services contract expires on the 31st of March 2024, and to stay compliant with public contract regulations, it is proposed that we take the procurement out to tender. It's a limited market, with most insurers only dealing through an insurance broker intermediary. To that end, and after a procurement process, an insurance broker has been appointed, and they will manage the tender and ensure we get the best possible selection of insurers. And we propose to delegate the final choice of the provider to the Section 151 officer. That's pretty much it. So, any questions?
Thank you, Councillor Snell. Do members have any questions or points they'd like to make? I think, as like with a previous report, we had a good discussion about this at informal cabinet where we ironed out any problems. So, if no other comments, I'll move to the recommendation. So, recommendation 1.1, agree and support the proposal to commission a tender exercise in accordance with the Public Contracts Regulation 2015 for the supply of insurance and associated services. Do you have agreement? 1.2, approve delegation to the Section 151 officer to enter into the award the necessary contracts following the procurement process in consultation with the portfolio holder of finance. Do I have agreement? So, item 15, which is the provisional financial outturn for 2022-23. Please note that Appendix 7 to this report is exempt, and therefore I'd remind members and officers not to discuss the contents of the appendix whilst we are live streaming. Recommendations 1.6 relates to Appendix 7, and therefore we will not decide recommendation 1.6 until the end of the meeting, where we will go into closed session where members of the press and public will be asked to leave the meeting, and we will go offline to discuss the contents of Appendix. We'll come back online to confirm the recommendations is agreed or not agreed. Councillor Snell, would you like to introduce your report, please?
Thank you, Leader. This is quite a big report, so I'm not going to read all of it, but we'll start off with the general fund outturn, and the purpose of this report is to set out the provisional outturn position for the financial year 2022-23, and prior to the formal closure of accounts. The report also sets out the key movements between the Q3 forecast outturn position presented to Cabinet on 15th of March and the provisional full year's position, and has been prepared and agreed with Commissioners. The main figure to take note of is that there is still a large funding gap of £434.595 million, which is detailed in the table on page 2 of the report. While still a large figure, it is an improvement, albeit a small one, of 17.757 million on the Q3 position, though it must be caveated, as all these figures will be, that this is still a fluctuating situation, and it will be continued to be reviewed through 23-24. The table includes potential, and I must stress potential, mitigation through use of available reserves and capital receipts from asset sales. So on the capital fund outturn, A comprehensive review of the programme to identify reductions was undertaken in July 2022. A further interim review has been conducted to support the setting of the 23-24 budget, and a wider review is in process and will be reported as part of the 23-24 monitoring. The reviews to date have reduced the programme, and there are further projects that are held pending assessment in the context of the requirements of the Section 114 notice. This has been reflected in the budgets as set out in Section 4 of the report, with the remaining schemes forecasting slippage of 12.292 million against a revised budget of 49.946 million. The detail of the slippage is set out in paragraph 4.4. Dedicated schools grants, not much to say on that. The reserve out-term position is in deficit of 0.514, but that's actually an improvement of 1.191 million, which has been achieved through an improved in-year position. And again, the detail of that is set out in section 5 of the report. And the public health grant has been performing within its grant allocation, so all is relatively okay there. So I think I don't need to go in any further. I'll leave it there for questions.
Thank you, Councillor Snell. Would any member like to comment? Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chair. Part of these reports I welcome very much. There's a few departments that have actually had an underspend on the budget, which we should very much welcome and congratulate those areas. In my own portfolio holder, we've had, in my own portfolio in education and skills, we have got a 13% underspend, and this is in quite a few areas of the council. So we should definitely welcome this as movement in the right direction. And that was just it, really, a comment, not a question. Sorry.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Carter. Any other member wishing to speak? Oh, sorry, Councillor Arnold.
Yeah, just coming back on Councillor Carter's comments there. It is very welcome, but I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that having to find a 10% reduction year on year when we all know that costs go up by at least 10% year on year, this is going to be a difficult thing to keep going, and something that as Cabinet we're going to have to really knuckle down and look at, obviously properly like we are, but continue to do that with officers.
Thank you. Any other member wishing to comment? I'd just like to make a couple of observations. I mean, it is disappointing that there's been slippage in the asset sales, but I mean, I think that has been explained to us previously before. But whilst I agree with both Councillor Carter and Councillor Arnold, this report is to be welcomed. We are in a better position than we were 6 or 7 months ago. If anything, we have a better understanding of the position that we're in. I think this sets a clear path for us. Whilst there's still more difficult decisions to be made, we are at least, and I hope people can see this, are on the right road. So unless members have any other comments to make, I'll go to the recommendations. Oh, sorry, Councillor Snell.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I wasn't going to add anything more, really, but I think it's important to note that you're right in what you just said. A few months, if you go back far enough, then when savings were proposed, it was almost guesswork. It was like, well, we think we can save this much money. What's changed is that now there's a much more analytical approach, and the different departments have to justify the cost savings that they're making to see that actually are these realistic. So what's coming forward now, it isn't like just chucking it up in the air and see what lands. This is actually properly thought out, properly planned, properly costed, and hopefully that'll be much more beneficial. But I do agree with Councillor Arnold. It's going to be, this year's probably, of all the years, going to be the easier one, although it's not easy. It's going to get harder and harder as time goes on, and it's up to this Cabinet and future Cabinets to maintain their resolve in making sure this job is carried through and the job that we've got to do is completed.
Thank you, Councillor Snell. So no other member wishing to speak? I'll move to the recommendation. So recommendation 1.1, the Cabinet comment on the 2022-23 forecast funding gap of 434.595 million, and note that this is balanced by the exceptional financial support from central government. Do I have agreement? 1.2. The Cabinet note that the position continues to be the subject to change, particularly due to the ongoing assessment of the investment portfolio, and pending completion of the audit of the financial accounts from 2020 to 2021 onwards, and therefore remains provisional. Agreed. 1.3, the Cabinet note that 2023-24 budget remains under review to consider the impact of the 2022-23 outturn position, and note that the potential for further budget vehement. This will form part of the budget monitoring in 2023-24. Do I have agreement? 1.4, the Cabinet approved the use of reserves as set out in Appendix 3, subject to the finalisation of the audit process relating to financial years 2020 to 2021 and 2021 to 2022, and note the balances are subject to change. Is that agreed? 1.5, the Cabinet note that the use of capital receipts in 2022-23 as set out in Table 5 to partly mitigate the request for exceptional financial support from government. Do I have agreement? The Cabinet note that 1.7, the Cabinet note that the further consultations with external audit will be required to finalise the technical accounting treatments relating to the investment valuations and the associated minimum revenue provisions transactions. Do I have agreement? 1.8, that the Cabinet note the positions set out in respect of capital programme and the reported reprofiling as set out in Section 4 of the report. Do I have agreement? 1.9, that Cabinet note the position of the dedicated schools grant and the public health grant as set out in Section 6. Do I have agreement? Thank you. So item 17 is review of the mail room and print services. Councillor Snell, back to you again. Oh, is it? Oh, apologies. Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Chair. This is quite a straightforward report. What it's asking for is, in fact, I want to say this is one of the first reports I brought to Cabinet when I was first made a Cabinet member. So to hear that those machines are now at end of life, I was quite surprised that that was 7 years ago. Because the multifunctional devices, which is the complex photocopiers that we have that do all those different functions, are at end of life, we need to look at a new contract for them, but also look at how we use them, and because we get so much data now off of the equipment, we know that a lot of the copiers aren't used at a level that makes them worth keeping them in position. So we're looking to reduce the number of stock and change some of the locations so that they'll share usage, or actually maybe it'll make people find other ways of doing it to be paperless, and we can reduce the volume of paper that we use as well that way. Another part of this is to actually look at our mailroom functions overall, how we copy things, what documents we make, and if there's other ways we can do that. And obviously with the measures we're in, all services are being looked at to see where we may be able to change what we do to still provide a good service but do it more efficiently. So this is asking to allow to do that piece of work really around whether it's possible to make changes to how we deliver.
Thank you, Councillor Arnold. Any member wishing to comment? No? Okay, so I'll move straight forward to recommendations. Sorry, I just would like to mention one thing. I'm more than happy to meet with the post room staff. They've asked to meet with me, and I will be meeting with them in the next week or so. Happy to talk to them about this. So just put that out there. So move to recommendations. 1.1, the Cabinet approves carrying out a combined MFD bulk printing and mailroom tender exercise for a contract of 3 years with an option for an extension of a further 2 years. Once the tender has been completed, this will be brought back to Cabinet for a decision on which option is to proceed. Do I have agreement? Thank you. So moving on to item 18, procurement of substance misuse service. Please note that the next 3 reports are public but have exempt appendices, and therefore I'd remind members and officers not to discuss the contents of exempt appendices whilst we're live streaming. Once all 3 reports have been introduced and discussed, we will go to a closed session where members of the press and public will be asked to leave. and we'll also go offline. We will then come back online to confirm whether the recommendations are agreed or not. Councillor Coxall, would you like to introduce your report?
Thank you, Leader. So the report seeks to go out to procurement in order to re-procure our substance misuse service, providing treatments for alcohol and drugs misuse. So at the moment, currently, we operate two services, so one for children's, one for adults. Part of the procurement is actually looking to combine this into one service across the whole board for all ages. Particularly, this will actually have quite positive effects for those children who are often could go between services. So it's making sure that we actually have that transition in place, and these children don't often get lost or possibly, of course, fall off the map with this, or find it difficult to continue when coming into new settings. So a big part of this is quite luckily, both of our services are expiring next year, and with the agreement in November last year, our adult service was extended for one more year in order to line up to that. So the report's really looking at doing this all-age service. At the moment, of course, the service is funded through the public health grant, and that is actually a condition of the grant. We have to provide the service. So if any decision to remove this service could impact the overall public health grant we receive as a local authority. So the procurement we're going out for is 5 years, with the option for four-yearly extension, for extension of up to 4 years. There is an option at the end of this with looking at possibly going into a joint commissioning with other local authorities nearby across Essex. So as a matter of, although when we get to the end of the end of the contract, there may be discussions with our partners in order of whether we can do in terms of improving economies of scale and providing a service across the whole of the county, if that is what other local authorities are interested in having those discussions. But of course, with the length of the contract, it gives us time to actually have that conversation. But I think there's not really much else really to comment, so if any member has anything to say.
Thank you, Councillor Coxall. Would any member like to comment? Councillor Johnson.
It's just a comment as well, just to say I welcome this report wholeheartedly, and I'd like to give thanks to everyone who's put so much work into getting it here. So, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Any other member wishing to speak? What am I asking for the agreement of? Okay, so we come back to the recommendation on that in the closed section. Item 19 is the procurement of sexual health services. Councillor Coxall, would you like to introduce your report, please?
Thank you, Leader. Much similar to the previous report, we're looking to go to procurement for tender for our sexual health services in the borough. Of course, this is a statutory service, as underlined by the NHS, the NHS Act 2006, in order to say that we must provide some sort of sexual health service in the borough, and it is the duty of the local authority to do so. Similarly, there is a provision in place, but of course they're going back out to exercise. I would like to stress that although again, there is an option at the end of this to look for a county-wide solution, and of course there's a number of reasons why when we look to work with partners and think strategically, that offer is on the table. But I think should be relatively straightforward in this regard. I'd like to really underline that provision of sexual health services do help drive down health inequalities across the borough. There is communities which are disproportionately affected, and I think it's really important. This service actually does wonders, and you'll be surprised actually just quite what it can actually do to help actually achieve our health aims across the borough, particularly around prevention.
Thank you, Councillor Coxall. Would any member like to comment? Councillor Snell.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Coxall. It's just a brief question, really. I mean, you mentioned a couple of times now about, at the end of these contracts, potentially going into an arrangement with other providers across the county. I take it there's no interest in that right now, otherwise we'd be doing that now.
Thank you, Councillor Snell. No, at the moment, the other local authorities Essex have recently renewed a tender and a contract for themselves, so at the moment they're in no position really to renegotiate their contracts. I think this is a much longer term strategy in terms of what we do, and at the moment we've tried to have conversations, and I understand and officers have tried to launch these idea of a cross-county provision. However, at the moment the contracts don't line up, and that's partly goes back to why the contracts we're looking for at this time is giving that extra long time, and hopefully at the end of it we'll be able to start those conversations, and eventually every local authority's contracts can tee up if that is an option that our partners wish to actually pursue.
Any other member wishing to speak? Councillor Arnold?
It was just really to ask Councillor Cockshaw that once the procurement and the tender process is through, that he just comes back and sort of offers us an update on the direction that we've taken. Like you say, it's an incredibly important contract, and I know that the Director of Public Health is incredibly competent, and we're going to get a great contract at the end of it. But it would be just nice to, like with the adult social care ones and the other ones going forward, if we understood the tendering process a little bit more.
Of course, Councillor. I think it's definitely, I'm quite happy. I know this report does look to delegate approval to actually award the tender at the end, as it is a matter of public health, but I'll be more than happy to provide updates to Cabinet just to make sure they're aware and kept updated of the process, so they themselves can understand who we are appointing at the end of this and the overall cost of the contract. And of course, going back to the earlier point, we're following up and making sure you will receive that information from the previous reports from last Cabinet.
Thank you, Councillor Cockshaw. Any other member wishing to speak? Okay, so as the recommendations will be heard in closed session, we'll move on to item 20, which is the A13 dualling final outturn report. Councillor Maney, would you like to introduce your report, please?
Thank you, Leader. As we know, the A13 widening programme is now substantially completed, and because of it we now have a much improved piece of infrastructure, that's vital to our ambitions around growth, employment, our ambitions for the Freeport, and of course it's a road that can now take an extra 150,000 vehicles per day, so it's vital to the future prosperity of the borough. At the same time, it's important, I think, to never lose sight of the benefits, but we can't escape what went wrong during the project. We now know that there's a 50% higher than anticipated cost to the scheme, and we're asked to note that and agree the allocation of a sizable amount of money to cover that and settle council's liabilities. And we're asked as well to note the lessons learned report and ensure that they're incorporated into our recovery plan, and I think that's essential. We really do need to learn lessons from this. But at the same time, this report isn't an inquiry into what went wrong. It's not to stimulate a debate about that. To some extent, we've had that, and there'll be more to come around, what went wrong. But we now know that the whole project really was flawed from the point where contracts were negotiated right through to completion. None of us, are happy about that, and if we could change things, we obviously would. But I think, as you've said yourself when you've spoke to this item, it's about now learning lessons moving forward. But for me as well, it's about celebrating as well what this does actually mean for the borough. It is actually a good news story, albeit it's one that will, has placed a heavy financial burden on the council, and we're all mindful of that. The report really is about post-construction matters now that have to be dealt with. As I said, we're asked to note the final outturn position and to agree an award of funding. And there are some other issues to be dealt with, for example, business disturbance claims which we need to settle, and of course there are some other ongoing highways matters which fall, highways maintenance issues which will fall to the council. As I said, I don't personally want to go over what we already know about the project and the flaws around that. This is really an attempt to tidy up some of the things that now have to be dealt with post-completion, and to note the final outturn figure and to agree funding for the settlement of that process. So I'm happy to take any questions. I'll move to the recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Maney. I think you're absolutely right. The construction of the road was essential for economic growth in the area. It's just a shame that it went so far over budget. But I think lessons have been learned. The one lesson is this council wasn't and probably never will be in a position to take on big infrastructure projects like this. We need to get experts in that are able to deliver at least close to budget, if not on budget. But you're right, this is a good news story. We've got much improved road, much improvements to our infrastructure in the borough. Any other member wishing to speak? No? Okay, thank you. So we now go into closed session and we'll come back to confirm the recommendations for items 18, 19 and 20. Yep. So the recommendations for item 17, procurement of substances, misuse of services. Recommendations 1.1. The Cabinet agrees to commence the procurement of the substances misuse service contract for a period of 5 years with the option to extend for 4 years in any period combination, subject to performance and funding. Do I have agreement? 1.2. That Cabinet agrees to delegate authority to the Director of Public Health in conjunction with the portfolio holder and Section 151 officer to award the contract following completion of the procurement process. Do I have agreement? Item 19, procurement of sexual health services. Recommendations 1.1, that Cabinet agrees to commence the procurement of the sexual health service contract for a period of 5 years with an option to extend for 4 years in any period, combination subject to performance and funding. Do I have agreement? 1.2, that Cabinet agrees to delegate authority to the Director of Public Health in conjunction with the portfolio holder and Section 151 officer to award the contract following completion of the procurement process. Do I have agreement? Item 19, A13 dueling final outturn report. Recommendations 1, note the projected final outturn figure as set out in Table 1 of this report and approve the allocation of 49.637 million to meet Thurrock Council's commitment to the scheme costs. Do I have agreement? Item 2, delegate authority to the Director of Place in conjunction with the portfolio holder for regeneration to conclude the settlement agreement and all outstanding compensation claims. Do I have agreement? Item 3, note the lessons learnt recommendations and instructs that these are incorporated into the Council's improvement and recovery plan. Do I have agreement? Also have recommendations 1.1 from item 14, provisional financial outturn from 2022-2023 report to deal with. Recommendation 1.1, the Cabinet endorsed the appointment of Neil Hartley and Rob Crusher as non-executive directors. Sorry, 1.6. So recommendation 1.6 on page 160 of the agenda, that Cabinet endorsed the appointment of Neil Hartley and Rob Crusher as non-executive directors as Pure World Energy Holdings Limited, following the recruitment process set out in sections 3.24 to 3.31 of the report, and that the leader or his nominee meets with the successful candidates prior to them taking up their appointments. Do I have agreement? Thank you. So thank you everyone for attending Cabinet this evening. That concludes the business of the meeting. I wish everybody a good evening. Thank you.